I was not happy about being forced into playing a role, as if I was a baptized member of any cult. I could not do much about their ungrounded belief that such a friendly person with a nice character could only be one of our brothers. Every time I attempted to do something about it, multiple hindrances were placed in front of me, as if to indicate that it was not the right time yet. I often asked myself, would there be any opportunity for me to stop living an undesired, and certainly not planned, double life? I simply kept going, while leaving them to believe whatever they wanted. I was tired of being judged, condemned, and discriminated against. I prefer to live a life of peace, and a life uniquely mine with some minor secrets which are of no concern to anybody. I felt like a clown entertaining everybody around me. My inner thoughts have never been supportive of those cultist movements, and religions of men were not appealing to me with their repeating history of perfect ignorance. Since I had applied for additional courses through another university in Bavaria, I often commuted between Stuttgart and Munich. It was a long and arduous journey, but was worth it. I could study a few more subjects in addition to what I was doing, or choose to remain with one of them at a later date. There were a few more entry exams to follow. I could do one involving direct study, and one by correspondence, but my Tübingen application was the first to be accepted. I was interested in studying medicine, and needed to decide on what branch of it was more suitable for me. I was passionate about anatomy, and fascinated with the subject. I borrowed many books, spending hours in libraries just to read all about anatomy and also astronomy. Two different, but at the same time highly valuable subjects. I was interested to know more about the exterior universe, as well as the interior one. I needed to take some of the books home to study or prepare my essays on a variety of important topics. This meant I had to stay awake for most of the night before going to work in the morning, and then going to the campus. In fact, I was thoroughly enjoying my activities, for I was continually on the move. As time passed, I became even better friends with the Strohbachs, without any emotional or serious attachments, so far having no particular worries. We used to speak about almost any subject, but when it came to issues concerning study at one of the universities, although outwardly supportive, I discovered they were not completely in favor, for they were influenced by witness ideals. I therefore felt the need to keep my studying secret, knowing that it would really surprise them. Would they approve? Then again, I was completely independent. They were trying hard to do whatever they could to adopt me as their son, for they could not have any children of their own, as previously mentioned. However, would they attempt to virtually divorce me from my parents completely? I would never do that to my mother. Maybe they did not know what they were getting themselves into. Maybe it was possible for them to adopt me without denying my parents' rights. In the early days, I noticed that Ruth's father remained at home, only going out occasionally. He did not look old, although he suffered from a major health problem, and always appeared to be busy doing things, never giving the impression of being seriously ill. A short while later, he was admitted to hospital. From then on, I was never able to see him, as he died. His daughter had a close resemblance to him, with her facial expressions. I never discovered what he died from. Ruth was saddened, but at the same time was very happy that, as her father wished, he was now part of the 144,000 members of the smaller flock, allegedly serving with Christ in the heavens. In fact, those who belonged to that upper class were the ones entitled to share the unleavened bread and wine, symbolically representing the sacrificed body of Christ and his spilt blood. I was not invited to the hospital or her father's funeral. Although it was sad, they did not cry for their loss, but were happy that he was apparently going to live forever in the heavens, as it was written in their Bible. Seeing people who did not cry for their loss was remarkable, and very unusual to me, but I was not in favor of displaying emotions either. I discovered that modern German is a beautiful language, especially in poetry and song. But it is not a romantic one, expressing some of the finer human emotions, as in Latin languages, like French or Italian. However, English, although sharing the same origins as German, is richer in expressing romantic human emotions. Germans have been inventive in creating alternatives to compensate the obvious lack, as one can discover in Goethe's and Schiller's wonderful works. On the other hand, I can also say that German literature is fabulously rich with artistic expressions, which cannot be translated into another language without losing its essence. If you desire to enjoy the music of Wagner, you may need to understand some finer expressions of the German language, just like well-educated and highly cultured Germans would. However, for a newcomer in the country, the language appears to be just black and white with their day-to-day usage. This makes people sound very frank with their expressions. One immediately knows where one stands, whether one is being told lies or the truth. This made it easier to learn to think the way they did, and easier still to learn the way they expressed themselves. Interestingly, I was able to comprehend a variety of German dialects from north to south, from Hamburg to Bavaria. I believe I surprised many people with my interest in languages, as I still do. Out of necessity throughout the years, I have learnt about 16 languages, plus several dialects. As the years passed, I learned a little more about the ways of Germans, but let me tell you a little story which may amuse you. One night, unable to sleep, my mind crowded with many worries about some of my exams, I decided to look into my textbooks and study. I had my bedroom door slightly ajar, without wanting to disturb anybody, only a chink of light escaping into the corridor. I heard Ruth whispering something, evidently trying to see what I was doing. Noticing this, I opened the door to discover her rushing back to their bedroom next to mine in absolute fear. She was panicking, and I was shocked about what I might have done wrong. I thought that perhaps my having the light on was not seen appropriate, or perhaps she was worrying that I was wasting electricity. However, how could that be, as I was paying for all my expenses? I approached their door to see if she needed help, but she was uncontrollably shocked and worried. As she approached the door, there was a loud thump, as if a big bag full of clothing had fallen onto the wooden floor. I rushed to their door, asking if they needed any help, in case somebody had fallen or was hurt. She tried to shout, but her voice was husky and very soft as she said, "Go, you devil! What are you trying to do?" Eventually she managed to shout, "I did not realize he is practicing devil worship." Obviously, I had no chance to talk to her at that moment and make sense of it needing to wait until the following evening, when I was back home. The reception was icy cold, and I tried to ignore it first, but I felt the need to talk before we had the evening meal. Otherwise, I was going to pack up and disappear. There was no response to what I told them, and began to think of getting a small flat close to the campus where I was studying. A few days later, I told them that I was going to look for different accommodation. When finally Ruth opened up and Siegfried kept asking me how I did that, I could not understand what I had seemingly done, so I asked what it was all about. Both of them started explaining their ordeal during the night, speaking at the same time. I asked them if they could be more specific and tell me all about it, one by one and slowly, so that I could understand them. Ruth started to recite a little witness prayer and explained what had happened. During that night, she said, I woke up suddenly when I felt our tuna being lifted up, wondering if Siegfried had just rolled in it and I was not under the cover. So I got up and turned the bedside lamp on, to discover to my shock and horror that my Siegfried was at the ceiling with all the cover still on him, draping on his sides, and he was still snoring. Then I noticed the light coming from your door. I came to your door and noticed the books with pictures of human skulls on them. Interestingly, I was studying for my exams, and told her I could not sleep, and so decided to read the books I borrowed from the library. Do you wish to look at them? She could not contain herself, repeatedly asking, So then, now what were you doing at that time of the night? I had to explain again that I was looking at some interesting books I had borrowed from the library. Slightly calmed, both of them spoke to me at the same time, and explained that they thought I was doing black art. Apparently, when she returned to their bedroom and turned on the light, Siegfried fell down onto their bed. Although he did not hurt himself, he was in great shock. I suppose anybody else would feel that way too. That is, if they experienced something like that. I felt none of these had actually happened. But in their imagination, their phobias were realized in regard to what they superstitiously feared, but their understanding of me practicing black art and trying to harm them did not sound right. I told them perhaps I should find different accommodation and leave them, as they were so incredibly scared of me trying to do black magic. I did not wish to put up with that also, but a few days later they decided that to do something like that on my part would be impossible. After all, they had helped me in the recent past, and certainly I would not be so wicked to conjure up bad spirits doing evil things. However, judging my mother by the gossip they listened to from other witnesses, they believed that she was a witch, as she read coffee grounds and told fortunes, and they felt the need to help Soren completely break away from her, for he could be badly affected by her wicked spells. They had already burnt a beautiful rug my mother sent, which was made especially for me, later telling me all about it, proud of their great help. Another time my mother sent me a pair of sturdy boots for winter, but I never saw them. As soon as they arrived, the Strohbachs had to burn them in the backyard, later telling me conceitedly how happy they were to burn those lovely boots my mother sent, and how they resembled human vertebrae after being burnt. They were so happy helping me keep away from her witchcraft. When I heard these things, I was extremely saddened about their adherence to such terrible superstitions due to their cultist belief. I was immensely saddened for my mother, who spent so much effort and money on those items. Much later I bought a book called Aberglaube, Superstition, and used to purposely display it on my desk and still keep it today. It is an interesting memory for me, and I knew that it attracted Siegfried's attention, as he also bought a copy. Let me tell you a little about Sibil, a girl Siegfried was keen to introduce me to. She was well known to him, and was the daughter of another witness couple, who were not only extremely strict with her, but also exceptionally fanatical in their belief. I had a very distinct feeling about some form of connection, if not a relationship, which might have developed between Siegfried and Sibil, but since I was not to know or question that, I pretended I never guessed what the nature of the situation was. Nothing untoward was spoken, and Ruth made no comments about it. Remember, the witnesses follow a two-witness rule to prove anything, and the victims are the only ones punished. It seemed that I was simply better off not knowing anything in regard to that issue. My impression was that they were hoping and ardently desiring that I would start a relationship with her. They believed that it would help Sibyl greatly, and her mental health would improve, while at the same time Siegfried would be off the hook, and hopefully I would not realize. There were times they picked the girl up and left us together for a while, to see what might develop between us. I felt like a test subject in a laboratory, but could not be persuaded. Sibyl was suffering from manic and schizophrenic depression, and her parents, being strict witnesses, did not help her. Sometimes she was happy, and at others completely depressed, in a dull coma. The parental treatment of her was tragic. For instance, when she chose to read a fashion magazine, it was immediately snatched out of her hands and replaced with Watchtower or Awake ones. These magazines contained major study guidelines when witnesses conducted their Bible studies. This attitude had apparently continued with her parents since her childhood. She dared not even associate with friends outside what they considered as the truth. Eventually, she needed professional treatment for her depression and personality conflicts. Her parents and the other witnesses liberally spoke about the reasons for Sibil's condition being due to the evil practice of psychology. They believed their daughter was hypnotized by the evil medical doctors, causing her mental breakdown. Apparently, those wicked doctors were spreading an evil word about the parents with their cultist belief, causing their daughters ill. Her parents would never accept responsibility, and indeed were incapable, helping Sibil with all their restrictions and fanaticism. Interestingly, the Strohbachs, like many other witnesses, were aware of her condition, but would never admit to it. Maybe they meant well by thinking that if they could match her with me, it would help her, but no consideration was given to me. How could they be so sure about our future happiness? Whenever I walked with her in a park, she was happy to tell me all about her problems and parental nightmares. Sometimes she would laugh hysterically or cry bitterly out of the blue. At times, she would pick a little flower and insistently ask me to smell it. Then she would ask what it reminded me of. I could not begin to guess what it should remind me of. She would laugh and say, "It is the same smell like my, silly." It seemed I was once again being educated, perhaps in a very Germanic way. It saddened me a lot. She could be helped by medical science, but her parents adamantly preferred not to allow her to have any treatment, believing that if they ardently prayed to the good Lord Jehovah, she would be healed. Nothing was happening, and the good Lord was not hearing their prayers. Maybe she was going to be well after Armageddon, when people became perfect as their Father God. Sibil was a good pianist, and could play perfectly well by simply recalling what she had heard. During a recital, she was to perform a few classical pieces, but immediately after playing the first few notes, she stopped and started to laugh hysterically, then cried rather loudly, causing concern within the audience. Siegfried was extremely keen for me to be befriended with her, often talking to me privately about what a lovely girl she was, and that if I could build a friendship, she would get better. Even when we were at the local sauna, he was very insistent, and that made me conclude that there was an important concern on his part which he needed to cover up. Ruth, on the other hand, was more understanding, and when she asked me about what I thought of Sibil, I told her what I had observed, and that it would not be of benefit to any of us if I accepted her as my girlfriend, let alone marrying her as Siegfried was hoping. Nothing further needed to be discussed. Sadly, many months later, we learned that she had committed suicide by hanging herself in the bedroom. Nevertheless, her parents still continued to blame medical science. There is much more to that story, such as her parents' totally unreasonable fanaticism and perhaps even interference by other witnesses. In their religiously manipulated wisdom, they might have meant well. This is a very sad story, and I'm happy that I was not involved with her. Even today, I wonder how medical science could be considered as devil worship, while Sibil, collecting certain flowers from the fields to attract the sexual feelings of the opposite gender, was not considered as a form of witchcraft, for such behavior has always been considered as evil by the witnesses. Consider how many innocent people have been murdered. Heresy and witchcraft, based on false accusations in the name of Christ during the Dark Ages. Even today, it is regarded a great sin by certain cults to practice herbalism. I was shocked by this real-life story, but no longer wished to dwell on it. Sibil's entire life had not been anything other than parental abuse in the name of the true God Jehovah, while her parents were considered as truly faithful witnesses. Because of their great faith in Jehovah, they forever disciplined her, chastised her, shouted, and severely punished her for her disobedience to the Lord's organization, and prayed that the good God's angels would heal her, if it was His will. Her parents believed that they were doing the most righteous deed, so that their daughter, who they loved so much, could live with them everlastingly in a new world. And therefore she needed no medical treatment, as the faithful Lord would look after her. In short, the devil-worshipping psychologists were apparently making her very ill, and her early death was due to those evildoers practicing black art. I was told that her story was made into a film, and I really hope so. At least I was not blamed for not furthering any relationship with Sibil, let alone marrying her as Siegfried had hoped. Ruth, on the other hand, showed no sign of being supportive of such an engagement. They had no idea that I was spending time with another girl, Ulla, who I met through the courses I was doing. My connection with her was perhaps more platonic, but I could further the relationship if I desired. She was keenly interested, conversing with others who also showed some interest in her. I was unwilling to drift into a situation where jealousies could become an issue, and instead concentrated more on my studies. She was studying the same subjects as me, but I preferred to remain as just good friends. I had the distinct feeling that she could be a permanent and trustworthy friend. I often traveled with the Strohbachs to different places around Kirchheim Tech, visiting Siegfried's relatives, his sister and mother, who was an extremely shy woman, never wanting to be photographed. We shared river cruises with them, visiting Ruth's relatives, mother and sister, and shared a very provincial, farm-style living with them. None of them were Jehovah's Witnesses, although both Siegfried and Ruth were hoped to convince them of the truth of the cult they adhered to. We spent some time traveling to the ancient city of Ulm, Frankfurt am Main, and surroundings. Some of those trips have been no more than to attend special witness assemblies, but my interest has always been the townships and cities with their colorful historic backgrounds. Whenever we traveled to France, you can guess how happy I felt. I was home. The people, music, food, and cultural historic sites, as well as typical French provincial lifestyles, took me back home, and I never wanted to let go. Alas, this was just a holiday, and I had study to undertake and things to learn, but at least visiting Paris and other parts of my beloved France from time to time was helpful to forget some of the troubling days of the past. We spent quite a while in Paris and visiting interesting areas, from Gare du Nord to Pigalle, from Élysée to Eiffel. Was still so exciting. Besides, my previous application for the Faculty of Medicine in Paris was very promising to further my studies. Apparently, when the Strohbachs had previously visited this great city, Ruth had been waiting for her husband somewhere she did not know well, and was approached by some gentlemen for services hoped from prostitutes. Later they were informed about certain spots in Paris which were reserved for girls looking for clients, and where she happened to be unawares. Siegfried laughed hysterically about it. Whenever in Paris, Siegfried was very keen to visit the witnesses' headquarters and printing facilities, desirous of introducing me to them. We spoke about conscription issues some young witnesses were facing in France, and were currently troubled with the law. We visited shopping arcades and the metro, and listened to partially protest songs of some youths on the streets, while taking photographs. Our visit to Normandy, Saint-Michel, and Saint-Malo was divine, and the weather fantastic. We had camping trips using our tents, but at night it was often very cold and humid. This was also where I met a young French lady, and we became close friends. Later, we corresponded with each other and agreed to meet from time to time. However, Ruth was annoyed with a young Armenian gentleman who was apparently pestering her, considering him an annoying slime. But his mother was very friendly. As Siegfried discovered around Saint-Malo and Saint-Michel, one had to be cautious when parking one's car at the beach, for there was a chance to lose it under the waves. The ebb and flow can often be extreme. At night Paris had a different character, and visiting places like Moulin Rouge was special. It took one's mind off the normal everyday concerns of life. No matter what part of the city one visited, it always remained home to me. We also visited Switzerland and did some climbing in the Alps. Doing so by the Jungfrau was fun, as one can imagine. At the Strohbach's request, we frequented another witness assembly at the sports ground in Basel for a few days. I was accommodated by a Swiss father and son, who were not witnesses. Sitting down and listening to repetitious lectures was extremely boring, but my visit to this wonderful alpine country was a great experience. I still remember the time when on our way to Basel. At one stage we stopped to ask for directions from a young lady walking on the empty streets. She screamed frantically, running away, probably thinking we were about to abduct her. How sad. However, life went on with work and lots of studying. I was introduced to yet another girl I met at one of those witness gatherings. Although not interested in those meetings, just seeing her excited me. I cannot say why I was so keenly interested in her. There were many other girls I could be interested in, but this one was a little shy and very different to the others. Every time I tried to approach her, she disappeared, which made me even more curious. Ruth discovered my interest in her, for she kept asking me whether I had spoken to her, but I had not. I was intending to write a poetic note and give it to her at the next opportunity. I wanted to know if I could have a chance to meet her at a more suitable time for a cup of tea. At this stage I was not interested in becoming very close, and I had no interest in sexual closeness either. All I wanted was to get to know her better. I formulated a few small poems, and with help from Ruth, I wrote them on small pieces of parchment in German and passed them on to her. She was quite surprised, for she did not expect anything like this from a foreigner. She told me years later she thought of me as being just like slimy snot. Perhaps not even someone she would be interested in getting to know. Her name was Magdalene Bauer, and she worked for a paper company called Otto in Kirchheim Tech as a secretary. Please do not ask me the meaning of this name. It may not be too pleasing. When I met Magda, short for Magdalene, for the first time, she was very keen about swimming. Not in a competitive way, for there were more important things to concentrate on, although she could turn it into a career. The most important and life-death concern for her was the Bible study she was introduced to by the witnesses. She was extremely keen about her place in the new world rulership allegedly promised in the Bible by Jehovah. It was possible, according to the teachings she was subjected to, that she was going to live in the promised system of a new world order after Armageddon, or be resurrected if necessary. This resurrection was going to be like emerging from the grave to live physically amongst the Lord's chosen, and the only righteous people. Apparently all witnesses belonged to that category. She was very sincere and friendly, and would never cheapen herself by falling into the arms of men, because she was learning all about the truth from the witness brothers. In reality, she was a very secretive girl, presenting the characteristics of someone lacking in self-confidence, needing the encouragement and approval of people other than her parents. In other words, everything she did or decided to do had to be approved and accepted by the witnesses she was studying the Bible with. I cannot claim myself being completely mature either. However, I preferred to analyze subjects and life circumstances before committing myself to anything. Unable to approach her, I decided to use a different method. I intended to write my thoughts about wanting to meet her, just to talk, without any expectations, on a piece of paper, and get her reaction. If she agreed to meet me away from the witnesses, we could talk while having a cup of hot drink somewhere. But how was I going to do that? My German was not sufficient at the time, and I did not want to appear like a fool in front of anybody. When I spoke about this issue with Ruth, for she asked me what I thought about that girl I was inquisitively looking at, she indicated that she would help me with a small poem, likening her to a beautiful bloom, and that I was dreaming of her every day. I even illustrated it with pen and ink art on a small parchment. When the opportunity arose, I passed that note with a small white flower attached to Magda. She took it and immediately put it in the little bag she was carrying. She did not even look at it, or the little flower, thus creating the impression that she did not want to know anything about it. Days passed, and I told Ruth that there was no response from Magda, and believed she was not interested in meeting me. When there was yet another opportunity, I did not approach her or say anything, not even share a smile. It was her turn to respond now. I did not detect any emotion on her part, and certainly no response. I was left wondering whether she had actually read the note I gave her. A few more days passed, and that evening both Siegfried and Ruth declared they had a big surprise for me. I was excited, but did not know what it could be. In fact, I had already concluded that my effort in writing a small poem and giving it to Magda was wasted, and I was no longer going to worry about it. However, Ruth had prepared a special dinner and set the table nicely in their lounge room. Siegfried was a little delayed coming home. When he arrived, he had Magda with him. After the usual greetings and reintroductions, we sat down at the table, enjoying the food and each other's company. This was a chance to learn a little more about her. She also appeared curious to get to know me, but one could see that she was either still very shy or needing to hide herself behind personal secrets. I was not going to pry. Afterwards, Siegfried took Magda home and came back very late. I had the very distinct feeling that he was keenly interested in younger ladies, and hoped everything was still in order, but felt the need to keep very quiet about my own concerns. Magda created the impression of being extremely naive, and years later this was completely proved to me. When Siegfried returned, he was very happy. Ruth told me afterwards that she had been observing me and Magda intently, indicating that we were both eyeing each other in a very favorable manner. "How well," I said to myself, "we can dream a little longer now." I learned all about her Hungarian-German origins. She had been born in a small town of Sopron on the border between Hungary and Austria. This city was also known on the Austrian side as Ödenburg. Her father was thought to be originally a high-ranking German officer, who her mother Emilie was pleasing with her services. Therefore the child was either illegitimate or simply unwanted. Later her mother proudly explained that she had been jumping up and down, purposely climbing ladders when tidying curtains so that she might fall, swallowing drugs, and drinking excessive wine in order to bring on a miscarriage. But nothing had happened, and Magda was born 2 years later than me. Her stepfather Samuel was not at all happy about Emilia's baby. According to unofficial information, her real father was a hot-blooded Nazi, similar to her current one, who once belonged to the Nazi youth. The whole family were said to have originated from the Volksdeutsche, folkloric Germans, minority group. However, after that memorable dinner, I did not see her for some time, and thought that I might have scared her away. In the meantime, I kept busy with my work and studies. Just like the Strohbachs had invited Sibil to accompany us to Rothenburg ob der Tauber, they invited Magda to come with us to this romantic city, but I had no idea until they picked her up, encouraging us to sit in the back of their car. I was surprised and, in some peculiar sense, shocked at this unexpected situation. However, I played the game. We spoke many things, but her interests were very little. She enjoyed some music, such as operettas, My Fair Lady, Gypsy Baron, or similar ilk being her choice. Otherwise, she preferred to listen to the radio, and was content with what they presented. She completed high school education and was subjected to some form of higher trade schooling, and was extraordinarily proud of it, but avoided speaking about her parents and their habits. She said she was currently only interested in the truth. That was clearly a very special subject for her, and she was learning much about it from brothers and sisters, desirous to do the right things, to live forever, like the rest of the witnesses worldwide. She also explained how happy she was, having discovered that I, too, was interested in this most important science. As they later explained, the Strohbachs were evidently telling her about me, being a very dedicated witness. I told her only a little about my background, and often my words in German were corrected by Ruth. I uttered a few words in French, and occasionally in Turkish for Siegfried to interpret when I could not express my thoughts fully in their tongue. But, as I later discovered, some of the things I was saying were interpreted incorrectly, completely opposite to what I meant, for he often made up sentences as if they were my words, due to his lack of knowledge in those particular languages. He would never acknowledge it when and if he was questioned about that, and I was not sufficiently fluent in German. I am convinced that Magda was never told exactly what I said. When we arrived at that wonderfully preserved historic town, I discovered the Strohbachs distancing themselves a little, perhaps to give us a chance to express our inner feelings towards each other. That was probably thoughtful of them, but I was feeling just like Magda, very shy about getting closer. She was shy because she did not want to offend the Lord, and I was shy, for I did not want to appear too hasty, needing to get to know her a little better. But here was a beautiful girl I was falling in love with, perhaps foolishly. I looked into her eyes, and they were gorgeous. Her skin was so white and without any blemish. Probably I was so blinded that I would not see any blemishes anyway. She reminded me of a most beautiful baby gazelle lost in a forest place, needing someone to care for her, but I did not want to express those words, which might have meant nothing in German, or even appeared to be an insult. Instead, I admired her looks, her physique, her height, and her entire person. I kept gazing deep into her oriental-looking eyes, and thought about her being the result of several interesting races marrying centuries ago. She was certainly very unique. Then a mild sadness dawned in me, as I thought of myself belonging perhaps to an ugly and even mediocre-looking race compared with her, for I had constantly been hammered for being mediocre and brainless during my childhood, and it was ingrained in my psyche. The thought of being who I was, and where I had originated from, made me think that she probably did not deserve somebody like me in her life. In that instant I contemplated running away, but I could not move. I was almost paralyzed. I held her hands and asked if she felt comfortable. She answered me with a very shy "yes." While I looked deeper into her eyes, I felt lost for a moment, but aware that she was also looking into my eyes. Mentally, I was telling her that I was falling in love with her, but in reality I did not really know what falling in love would be like. Instead, I uttered in a shy way, "You are so pretty." I could say so many wonderful things in French, but she would not be able to understand. Any other language would not be much good either. Then, knowing the best language could only be the language of love, I pulled her gently towards me. She did not resist. Alas, this made my physique react to this closeness with naturally occurring changes. But luckily she did not notice anything. In fact, she seemed to enjoy the closeness, and I could feel her breath on my face as I kissed her on the cheek at first, and then her lips. Then I shyly told her that I was hoping she did not mind. She was happy. I wondered why this had such an impact on me. I thought she probably felt the same way. We walked hand in hand for a little while, and noticed Ruth full of smiles and Siegfried taking photographs. This was a unique experience for me, and hoped that I had not made a fool of myself. They seemed to be extremely happy with themselves.